We're here on Daf Gimel and Beis, and we're up to the Gemara's Kasha here. Gemara asks the Kasha, time of the Kosa Rachmana Aleha, Halav Hachi Havamina Chos Isham V'Yavemis My Taima. And the Gemara says, what was the Havamina? Why did we think, why would we entertain the possibility that even in the case of Ereva, there is a mitzvah Yibum? And the Gemara says, Damridan Aseh Dochi Losese, Aseh Eseh B'Dochi Loses. That we have a principle that an essay overrides a losese. And the Gemara is going to reject this because essay tochaloses derived from kelayim b'tzitzis only applies to a classic regular lav, but not to a lav sheish bo kares. But in the Havamina, which is what we're spending a lot of time on, there was a principle of essay tochaloses in the case of yibum, even vis-a-vis an erva sheish bo kares. Let's just review what we discussed yesterday at the end of our shir yesterday so that we can move forward today. A lot of what we discussed yesterday is based on Reb Shimon Shkar. The question is the following. What happens in the mitzvah of Yibum? Is the mitzvah of Yibum the mitzvah of Bia, or is the mitzvah of Yibum the kinyan? That as a result of the bia, she becomes what we call niknes lo, and she's an ashes ish. It seems, again, we don't know all the sources for this yet and all the proofs for this yet. That's going to come around the bend, but nevertheless, the bottom line seems to be that the mitzvah of Yibum is not the bia, it's the kinyan that results from the bia. And therefore, what is Esei Docha Losa going to help me here? Even if I apply that principle, it could only override the lav, the isur. But that's not going to help me for the kinyan. Why? Even if I hold Esei Docha Losa, even in the case of Losa Sheish B'Kares, nevertheless, we're talking about arayos. We have a principle in arayos, Ein Kedushin Tovtzin, the arayos. And that principle, l'chora, again, we're going to get into this in just a minute, is independent of the Isur Bia. Even if you would bracket the Isur Bia, but you're talking about an erva, a person cannot be kona a kinyan on an erva. A man could try to marry his sister from now until doomsday. Halachically, he's not married to her. So therefore, if this Yevama is an erva, we apply the principle of Ein Kedushin Tovtzin the erva, then how is he going to be Makayim the mitzvah in such a way that we can apply the principle of Esei Docha Losa? It's impossible for him to be Makayim the mitzvah because the mitzvah equals the kinyan, and Ein Kedushin Tovtzin, there's no kinyan in the case of an error. However, this depends upon another issue, and that is what blocks Tfisas Kedushin. When we say there's no Kedushin Tovtzin in an error, there are two ways of understanding. One way is because of the Isur. The Isur Erva, the Isur Kares, is what blocks the Chalos Kedusha. The Ishus cannot be Chal because he's doing it through an Isur. The other way is to say, it's the shame Erva. Her status as an Erva makes it impossible for him to be Konaha. The Erva status separates them almost in a, if I can call it, I'm not in physics, but an anti-magnetic force in which the two polar opposites separate from each other instead of coming close to each other. There's an error relationship. If you would assume that the reason why Ein Kedushin Tovtzin Be'arayos is because of the Isur, then I would say, let's apply Esei Docha Losa. For the sake of the mitzvah's essay, we override the Losa. Therefore, there's no Isur Kares, and hence, there will not be Itfisas Kedushin. And everything is fine. He can be Makadish, and be Mekayim the mitzvah of establishing, effectuating a kinyan, because there's no Isur, and there's no Isur, there is Tfisas Kedushin, hence he has the mitzvah of being Kona, his Yevama, and then we'll apply the principle of Esei Docha Losa. But if I assume the other side in this famous Chakira, namely, that what blocks the Tfisas Kedushin is the Shem Erva, not the Isur, then what are you going to have over here? You're going to have a heter on the Isur because of Esei Docha Losa. So where's the essay over here? There's no possibility of Tfisas Kedushin because at the end of the day, she's an Erva. So yesterday, we concluded that discussion with an insight here, a chiddush here of the Chemdas Shlomo. And if you're following the text inside, it's on page Yud Zayin on the left column, and it starts with the word v'tiretz. And he says the following: if esei docha losase, which is the havamina here, even in the case of a losase sheish bo kares, then what we would establish is that since the Torah overrides the erva of Eches Ach in every single case of Yibum, by definition, Yibum requires violating what normally would have been, if not for the mitzvah of Yibum, the Itzer erva of Eches Ach. Then we're going to take Eches Ach as our paradigm case and equate all arayas to Eches Ach. And what this means is that just like the Torah was matir the erev of Eches Ach, it's also matir all the other arayos, because we have an equation between Eches Ach and other arayos. So every case of Yibum, by definition, is, or shall I say, employs or stands upon the shoulders of Esei Docha Losas. And again, we're talking about Losas Sheish Bo Kares. However, says the Chemdas Shlomo, we're going to take this one step further. And we're going to say the following, that this principle of Esei Docha Losase, as it applies here in Yibum, goes way beyond the normal principle or application of Esei Docha Losase. So again, just to get the structure, according to the Chemdas Shlomo, there are two dinim of Esei Docha Losase. There's the general application of Esei Docha Losase, and then there's the specific application of Esei Docha Losase in the case of Yibum. How so? What makes this Esei Docha Losase unique? And the answer is, this is again based on sugyas and Yevamos. You have to know everything to know anything here. But we'll have later on that the mitzvah of Yibum is fulfilled in the first biyah, not in subsequent biyah. And therefore, the question that we have to ask ourselves is the obvious question. How can you tell me that all of Yibum in the erev of Eishes Ach is predicated on Esei Docha Losase? And that's going to be okay for the first biyah, because there's a mitzvah say in the first biyah. But after the first biyah, there's no Esei. Like, imagine if there was a bracha, Asher Kinshanu Mitzvah Savet Tzivanu L'Kayim Mitzvahs Biyah, or Al Mitzvahs Yibum. Would you be making that bracha every single time you had a relationship with the Yevamah for the rest of your married life? The answer is no. Why? Because the mitzvah of Yibum is concentrated in the first biyah. So then the question is, well, you're in a bind over here, says the Chemdas Shlomo. You can't apply the principle of Esei Docha Losase to override the Isur Erev of Eishes Ach for the balance of the marriage, because that mitzvah say to be Docha the Losase and override the Erev of Eishes Ach only applies to the first biyah. He's going to make his bracha before the first biyah, before he takes off his clothes, because it's an Isur Erev. You're not allowed to make a bracha with his Erev exposed. But after that, he doesn't make a bracha on the rest of the balance of his married life. Therefore, we must conclude that Esei Docha Losase, in the case of Yibum, has a special element to it, going beyond Dechia Ba'alma, to use this term, the regular classic Dechia. O Eles Hi Al Halav Heter Gomor. The Torah is saying that whenever there's Yibum, the lav of Eishes Ach is inapplicable. So that what we have to underline here, which I'll do if I ever find my pencil, is Mafkia Legamre. We're removing completely the whole entity of what we call the Erev of Eishes Ach. And this goes way beyond the normal application, the limited application of Esei Docha Losase. Esei Docha Losase tells me I have a lo taseh. I'm going to override the lo taseh for the sake of the essay if he fulfills the essay simultaneously with the violation of the lo taseh. That's not going to help me for the second biyah in the case of Yibum. The only choice that we have, our back is against the wall, is that in this case, the essay is telling me that there is no erva, that there is no Isur of Eishes Ach. And by equation, to all arayos, there's no Isur Erva. Hence, he can be Makayim the mitzvah of what we call the Kinyan, even though she's an Erva, because she's not an Erva. This is really my mind. What it means is that the Torah made her into an Erva, and the Torah says she's not an Erva. That's what we call Heim Amru V'Heim Amru, meaning the Torah said that she's an Erva, and then the Torah said she's not an Erva. And if the Torah did that, and we have no choice in the case of Eishes Ach, otherwise we'll undermine and torpedo the whole enterprise of Yibum, then the Torah is going to do that in the case of all arayos. I have one problem with this Chemdet Shlom. Maybe you could set me straight. The Gemara is going to reject this because it's a chiyuv kares, and we don't find esei docha losas in a case of a lav sheyesh bo kares. I don't understand that Gemara according to the Chemdet Shlom. The Torah gave me the mitzvah of Yibum, even though, despite the fact that there's an Isur Erev of Eishes Ach. So you're telling me that the Esei Docha Losas there in this context is going to remove the whole Shem Erev? If that be the case, what are you hacking me about Chiyuv Kar? Who cares whether it's a Lav Sheish Kar? Yibum, by definition, the Torah commanded us to fulfill this despite the Kares of Eishes Ach. I don't have an answer to that question. Now, we said that this whole Torah is based on Reb Shimon Shkop. So Reb Shimon Shkop writes the following: Midin esei docha losas hifkia haTorah af es sibas ha'isur v'lo es ha'isur leva. I'm going to say the following: that this Shari Yosher is a reformulation of what we saw in the Chemdet Shlom. It's a different, it's a different perspective and a different formulation, but it's really essentially the same. The goal of Reb Shimon Shkop is identical. The end zone, right, when you score the touchdown, is identical to the end zone of the Chemdet Shlom. And that is to remove the erva such that there could be tfisas kedushin, and hence there's a mitzvah saseh. How do you remove the erva? So according to the Chemdet Shlomo, we have to remove the erva because we're dealing with, in every case of Yibum, an erva veishas ach. We must remove that erva. And he proves it from the fact that the second bia is permissible. Minus the mitzvah, because there is no, right, bracket the mitzvah, there's no mitzvah on the second bia. It must be that the erva was removed. Reb Shimon Shkop says something else. He says the following: that there are two ways of learning esei docha losas in the context of Yibum. One is that the essay gets rid of the losas; it overrides the losas. The other way of saying it is that the essay removes the sibas ha'isur. We go back to the root, to the shoresh, and we pinpoint what is the shoresh that generated the isur. And now esei docha losas, at least in the context of Yibum, I don't know if Reb Shimon is willing to universalize this, is going to go down into the shoresh. I mean, I don't want to say it in too many words because it reminds me so much of the dentist, but it goes down into the root, and it removes the root of the Isur. Every Isur has a root, which he calls the Siba. We would call it the Oser. The Oser means that which causes and generates the Isur. But what generates the Isur? It's the Shem Ereva. Esei docha losas is not just going to permit the losas, the violation of the losas for the greater good of the essay, but rather it's going to go down to the tipul shoresh, and it's going to remove the shoresh ha'isur, the sibas ha'isur, the cause of the isur, veloas ha'isur bilva. And therefore, ilu hoya nidcha isur arise. Now we go back and ask ourselves, what's the shoresh of the isur arise? What causes that isur? And the answer is, the shoresh ha'isur is the erva itself. that relationship of an erva. Ein perusho sheitira Torah lava al Isra. You'd be looking at it in a very limited kind of perspective if you say that Esei Dochalosa means the Torah was mat to the Isra. No. It goes way beyond. Elef kia bimenu legamre, and here I would add Sibas ha'Isur dahainu shem erva. So again, it's identical to what we saw in the Chedesh Shlomo. They were trying to remove and be mafkia, undermine and neutralize the shem erva, but for two different reasons. According to the Chedesh Shlomo, we remove the shem erva because otherwise, how could he have a bia shnia and maintain the balance of his married life? There's no mitzvah's essence. According to Rav Shimon Shkop, however, the reason why mafkia the sibas ha'isur is because that's the way Esei Dochalose operates. Esei Dochalose does not attack the isur per se, but rather goes down to the cause of the isur, the sibas isur, which is the shem erva, the acher, and therefore. Visas hakinyan shehi mitzorach hamitzvah is kamoshe bitla Torah siba goremes asa isaka bitla games asiba goremes le'it visas kedusha. What was the reason why there's no tfis kedusha according to Shimon? Because she's an erva. Well, I have news for you. The Torah was mavatal the isur. It means the Torah is mavatal the sibas isur. The sibas isur is the shem erva. If we could be mated the shem erva, then we understand how Esei Dochalosa can work, because it's the Shem Erva that blocks Tfisas Kedushin. Hence, if I remove the Shem Erva, now there will be Tfisas Kedushin. I clear the pathway for Tfisas. Now, from my perspective, this is a siyum, tam v'nishlam, on that part of the Sunnah. He has here another insight of the Afike Yam, but I think it's anticlimactic. I mean, we've really hit what I call the home run, the main point of what we want to do in this sunnah. But here we want to introduce this. What I'm about to say is very strange, but I don't have another way of saying it. A machlokes between the Rambam and the Shagas Aryeh. I mean, that's very strange. The Shagas Aryeh lived 2.5 centuries ago. The Rambam lived 8 to closer to 9 centuries ago. Yeah, we're on 2100 already, right? Or what are we up to? Yeah. 2100. The Rambam lived in the 1200s. I mean, he started in the 1100s. So you're talking about a machlokas here, very odd, between a Rishon and an Achron. But that's all I have in front of me. And it's a very, very fascinating machlokas. You know that we have a mitzvah of matzah on the night of Pesach, and we have an Isur Chodesh. What happens in a case of matzah that's Chodesh? Chodesh is an Isur Lav, classic, it's not a Chiv Karetz. Shall we apply the principle of Esei Dochalosis? And the Rambam says there's no Esei Dochalosis. Perek Vav b'Hilchos Chometz Matzah Halacha Zayin Ein Adam Yotzei Achilas Matzah Shehi Asura Lo Midin Chodesh. The Shagas Aryeh says this is not correct. Kol Matzah Asura B'Lav Kevan She'ein Bo Kares. Right, so we're talking about Chodesh. Mutar Lotzes. We're going to apply the principle of Esei Docha Losa, and the mitzvah say of matzah overrides the losas of Chodesh. He says, however, we should not apply, this is a footnote or a bracket, we should not apply Esei Docha Losa to eat this matzah if we have available for us other matzah. But if the only matzah he has is Chodesh, I don't know if you know this, there's a major issue about Chodesh in Chutz La'aretz. You're aware of that, right? That's what happened to split Chicago. Yeah. Anyway, but Rabban Salvation, for example, and I looked out, I gained from this, he was makar on Chodesh in Chicago, even though it's Chutz La'aretz. Now, those who are machmir on Chodesh and Chutz La'aretz, this has nothing to do with our sugya, are standing on the shoulders of the Shagas Aryeh. It was the Shagas Aryeh who really, he was at the head of the what should I call it? The the career, not the career. What's it called? The enterprise. The what? He was at the vanguard of the project. What's the word I'm looking for? Not project, of the campaign. Okay, that we'll use the word campaign. He was at the head of the campaign to Aser Chodesh and Chutz. They say about the Shagas Aryeh that whenever he traveled, wherever he traveled in Europe, he always carried his own kelim, his own utensils, because he was afraid to rely on anyone's kashrus because people were not makbid on Chodesh and Chutz. In any event, the Shagas Aryeh is of the opinion that if the only matzah you have is Chodesh, which is very, very common, this is not a fluky case, because Chodesh, let's say, spans a number of months, and Chodesh becomes Yoshan only on Pesach, and on the second day of Pesach. So on the first day of Pesach, everything is Chodesh, unless it's Yoshan. There's the Shagas Aryeh, and you'll see this on the top page, Yud Ches, you have Yud Ches. You don't have Yud Ches. Oh, I don't know what to do. Okay. I can't give you this Gemara unless you give me another Gemara to take its place. So the Shagas Aryeh says we have a principle called Esei de Matzah Docha Lota Sed Chadash. And offhand, the Shagas Aryeh is absolutely correct. Again, the Gemara limits Esei Docha Losa Sed and adds the proviso, it's got to be a Losa Sheish Malchus and not a Losa Sheish Kares, but Chadash is a Losa Sheish Malchus. Why not apply the principle of Esei Dochos? Okay. So we're going to give a partial answer to this question based on Tosfos in Kedushin, who in turn bases himself on a Yushalmi. And Tosfos in Kedushin, Adaf Lamed Ches Amud Aleph, quotes the Yushalmi that addresses the issue of Matzah Shel Chodesh. And the Yushalmi quotes two opinions. A machlokes between Rabbi Yonah and Rabbi Yossi. These are Amoraim. Normally, Rabbi Yossi is a Tana, but in Yushalmi, Rabbi Yossi is an Amora. There's also Rabbi Yossi in the Bavli that's an Amora. Rabbi Yonah is of the opinion that the mitzvah of matzah overrides the Isser of Chadash, in case he has no access to any other matzah except for Chadash. And he's Yotzi B'Yedei Chovas, Esei Docha Los. That's Rabbi Yonah. And certainly the Shagas Aryeh could be standing on the shoulders of that opinion of Rabbi Yonah. Rabbi Yossi says, Eino Yotzei Ba. Why not? Why don't we apply the principle of Esei Docha Losas? Now, I just want to point out a footnote of my own. This is not related to another sugya called Mitzvah Ba B'Avera. Mitzvah Ba B'Avera only applies when I couldn't have possibly gotten access to the Chefetz Shel Mitzvah without violating an Avera. So that's the case of Lulav HaGazal. Here we're not talking about that. We're talking about an overlap of the mitzvah of matzah and the Isser of Chadash. It's not that because of the Isser of Chadash, he was able to obtain this matzah. And offhand, Rabbeinu Yonah and the Shagas Aryeh afterwards are correct. Esei Dochim. Rabbi Yossi, matzah vis-a-vis Chadash is on a lower level. We're going to demote matzah vis-a-vis in comparison to Chadash. It's going to be a kind of an essay. Again, not that the Losa says Yeshbo Karetz, and therefore no essay can remind them, but that we're going to demote matzah. Now, I don't like to demote any of it, so it's certainly not matzah. We eat matzah l'teyomah. What is inferior about matzah? Says Rabbi Yossi, Shenitztavu ala matzah b'Mitzrayim kodem matan Torah. Now, what this means halachically, philosophically, I don't know. Right now, we'll accept it at face value. And Buddhist Chacham, that a mitzvah is inferior because it was commanded before Matan Torah at the time of Yitzis. So I would have said just the opposite. It's counterintuitive. Adarabah, if we had the mitzvah even before Matan Torah, doesn't that indicate its extreme significance, its severity? No. If it comes to before Matan Torah, then it belongs to a different world. Oh, but Chadash is an Isser li'acharman. You're asking a question. You're a step ahead of me. You're a step ahead of me. Wait a second. You're asking a question. I just want to present first of all the sheet of Rabbi Yossi. Then you'll ask your question. It's an excellent question. So what does Rabbi Yossi say? Rabbi Yossi says that when we compare a mitzvah to an avera, and the mitzvah is going to override the avera based on an essay of Velosa, said they both have to be on the same level. They both have to be in the same realm. Chadash is an Iser that's given with Matan Torah, whereas Matzah is a mitzvah that's given prior to Matan Torah. B'shas Yitzias Mitzrayim. Now, Mitch has a cash on that, but again, before we get to your cash, Mitch, I just want to know, do we have any intuitive understanding of why we demote a mitzvah because it was given before Matan Torah? I thought intuitively just the opposite. Are you with me on that? In other words, yeah, go ahead. Speak.
I mean, in Matan Torah, there's for the ones.
Well, we have to apply a principle of right Torah Tziva Lot of Moshe, which means that we accepted all 613. Now, you're asking a different question. Once we accepted it before Matan Torah, at the time Yitzis Mitzrayim, did we have another? It seems like almost redundant to again repeat a Kabbalah Torah, but that has to do with a different principle called Mischadsha, meaning with Matan Torah, we have to add this chidush that we accept it not just because of the prior to Matan Torah's status, but because of the Matan Torah status. Like, for example, the mitzvah of Milah, correct. But we have to re-accept the mitzvah of Milah. And it could be that there are differences between Milah before Matan Torah and Milah after Matan Torah. I don't know, again, everything is a sugya here. There's so many different sugyas. Even the Isur Gzela, which was given before Matan Torah, is not identical to the Isur Gzela after Matan Torah. But you know what? I'm wondering, what about Shabbos? The Gemara says that they got Shabbos before Matan Torah. Does that put, whose phone is that? Is that mine? You have to keep it on? No, if it's going off, it means you have to keep it on. I actually have to keep mine on too, but I'm not keeping it on. My wife is on her way to Ben Gurion Airport, and she told me that, if the flight is delayed. In any event, so you hear what I'm saying, Rabbosai? If Shabbos was given tomorrow, does that make Shabbos inferior? I don't know. I would have said just the opposite. But now we have Mitch's catch. Mitch is asking, what do you mean Chadash before Matan? There couldn't have been Chadash before Matan. If you're saying that there could have been a mitzvah, there wasn't, then the Torah is saying, well, we're going to upgrade this mitzvah to a Matan Torah status. But you can't upgrade a mitzvah to a Matan Torah status if it was impossible, or the Isur in this case, if it was impossible to have that Isur. And there's no possibility of an Isur Chadash before they get to Eretz Yisrael, because it's only when they get to Eretz Yisrael and they're commanded in the midst of the Omer, at that point do they have an Isur Chadash. But in any event, let's just, again, as I said, with a certain level of Amunas Chacham, a blind faith, let's just let this principle sink into our brains, like Bonanza, you remember? And it's just, right? And it's Ein Esei Shelifnei Adibur, Dochel Lav Shaliachar Adibur. We just have to accept that as axiomatic. Okay. All right, there's another complicated principle called Mitzvah Saseh B'Tzida. Okay, I don't know if we can get to that. Maybe we'll have to do it. Okay. So now we have a Yusham, quoted by Tosfos Kedushin, that presents a debate between Rabbi Yonah and Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yonah says that Esei Dochalos applies to matzah, meaning matzah overrides the losa in this case of chadash. And in contrast, we have the shita of Rabbi Yossi that we demote matzah to a somehow a lower status because it was a mitzvah say that was given before Matan Torah at the time of Yitzias Mitzrayim, and it cannot be docha a losas. I'll tell you what I don't like here. The Rambam says, "Ein olav yotzi v'achilas matzah shel chadash." Does the Rambam have in mind this Yushalmi with the Kodem Matan Torah? I don't know. Again, the Rambam doesn't always give us all the logic that underlies his halacha, but generally speaking, if it's a kind of a radical breakthrough, and the Rambam is suspending the principle Esei Docha Losas, I don't know, it seems to me he should have given us some clue of that. But that's what we have. Now the Shagasari says that although in the Yushalmi there's a machlokus about it, in the Bavli there is no machlokus about it. Af Esei Shelifnei Adibur, like Rabbi Yonah in the case of Matzah, Docha Losas Sheliachar Adibur. And therefore, in a machlokus between two days in Yerushalmi, one of which was accepted in the Bavli, we're going to accept that day in Yerushalmi, which is reflected as the stama in the Bavli. So, since in the Bavli we accept the shita of Rabbi Yonah, Esei Dochalo said, despite the fact that matzah was kodem adibur, that's how we should paskin, and therefore, la'alocha, we should be matir a matzah of isur because of Esei Dochalosas. And here we have, now we're fast forwarding another 100 years and change, to the Or Sameach. The Or Sameach is already 20th century. And he wants to defend the Rambam, which, by the way, is typical of the Or Sameach, both in his Or Sameach on the Rambam and in his Meshech Chachma al Torah. He's always, very rarely does he disagree with the Rambam. He's always there to defend the Rambam. Now, what I would like to ask you as we go through this Or Sameach, it's going to take us a while, is whether or not you think, it's just a question, you won't understand why I'm asking this until you see the Or Sameach, but keep it in the back of your mind, do you think that the Or Sameach was influenced by Reb Chaim Brisker? Reb Chaim Brisker died, I would say, I don't know exactly what year he died, but probably around 1920. Okay, so you're familiar with Reb Chaim's derech. So I'm wondering, this is what when I read this Or Sameach, I was wondering if he was influenced by Reb Chaim. Okay. Again, I apologize that you don't have the photocopy, but hopefully you'll follow it. Torah Shebal Peh. Lidas habavli beikara ein makom lechol nidon hayushalmi b'matzas chadash. In other words, what the Or Sameach is claiming is that the exact opposite of the Shagasari is correct. The Shagasari is assuming that if there was no debate in the Bavli about this issue, it means that the Bavli accepted Rabbi Yonah, that Esei Dochalosa in the case of Matzah. The Or Sameach is going to say that, on the contrary, the absence, the omission of the Bavli about any discussion about Matzah's Chadash is because, on the contrary, there is no Esei Dochalosa in the case of Matzah's Chadash. Why not? Right? You're going to take matzah and subsume it as an essay shel achila. you're going to take chadash and subsume it as a losaseh of achila. An essay of achila could not override a losaseh of achila. We don't know why yet. I mean, again, just we're moving slowly here through this, navigating through this maze of the Or Sameach. But do you understand where he's taking us? The Rambam, when he says that you cannot eat this matzah to fulfill your mitzvah because it's also, he's not invoking the halacha of ein esei docha los esei because the esei of matzah came before the dibur and all that stuff. And the Rambam is reflecting the shita of Rabbi Yossi against Rabbi Yonah. Forget about all that. There's another principle here. We do not find in Shas esei docha los esei when the esei is achila and the los esei is achila. Listen to this. Sheidache esei hamutal al hagavra es ha'iser achila hachal b'chefta. It's basically what he's trying to do is he's saying that esei docha losasa requires an absolute confrontation in which the esei and the losa are on the same platform. They're simultaneous, they have to be be'idna, and they both, so to speak, address the same object or subject. That's not so in the case of achila on both sides of the equation. Because on one side of the equation, the achila addresses the gavra. What difference does it make which matzah is? You can put all the matzahs in the world in front of you, and you cannot pinpoint one particular matzah and say that this matzah is the matzah's mitzvah. What gives it this? Again, you could say it's royal mitzvahs because we did ushmartenes on matzahs, but there's no chiyuv on my part to eat this matzah. All matzah is equal in the eyes of the Lord. Very democratic. So therefore, we have to conclude, says the Or Sameach, that the mitzvah achilas matzah is on the gavra, not on the chefetz. Masha ein kein, when it comes to macholos asuros, we divide up macholos asuros into two categories. I should say better. We divide up macholos into two categories. There are macholos mutaros and macholos asuros. If he had shechted this animal properly, it would be basa kosher. He didn't shecht it; it's the vela. If this grew before he brought the omer, and then he brought the omer, then it's yashin. If it grew before the omer, he hasn't yet brought the omer. It's chadash. Therefore, the iser is in the chefta, and now there's a disconnect between the essay and the losas. The essay is on the gavra, and the losas is on the chefta. Does that sound familiar to you? This terminology of gavra and chefta. I mean, Reb Chaim, it's not Reb Chaim. I'm amazed that I never. Again, I'm a little bit familiar with the writings of Reb Meir Simcha, but I never knew he was like jumping out of the pages of Reb Chaim. I mean, Reb Chaim took the Gemara in Nidarim on Daf Beis and he made a science out of it. He made a methodology out of it. The Gemara says in Nidarim, what's the difference between a neder and a shvua? The Gemara says a shvua is an isa gavra and a neder is an isa chefta. And Reb Chaim built on that, castles in the sky. He says, "Ein din dechia ela beiser lav she'eno chal b'chefta ela hu iser gavra." Kigon. So let's take one of the classic cases of essay dochalos, which we're going to get to. We're really jumping ahead of ourselves. Shviras etzem b'Pesach l'shem achilas Pesach. Right? What happens? You've got bone marrow, and it's edible. And the law of Korban Pesach is that you have to eat everything that's edible, but you're going to have to break the bone in order to get access to the bone marrow. And that's exactly what you do because of acidophalosis. Again, we're going to ask you a question. It's not be'idna, it's often so, but this is one of the classic cases of acidophalosis. He says the following. You know why Esei Dochalosa applies over there? Because the Iser Shviras Etzem B'Pesach is an Iser Gavra. And the mitzvah of Achilas Korban Pesach, Basar Pesach, is a mitzvah Sagavra. So we have an absolute overlap. I mean, what's the word I'm looking for? Coordination, but I'm looking for a different word. Which word?
Equation.
The equation. We have an absolute equation between the essay and the losas. So essay docha losas. So the Rambam now is to be understood in a whole new light. The Rambam is not classifying mitzvos as before the Matan Torah, before Dibur, or after Dibur, and matzah is demoted because it's before the Dibur. Forget about all that. The problem is that I cannot apply mechanically essay docha losas in the case of matzah and machol sasuritz, because matzah is a chiyuv gamra and machol sasuritz is an isur chefta. Not like the case of shviras etzem shel pesach, where the essay is on the gamra to eat the marrow inside, and the losas is on the gamra not to break the carbon, the etzem. But now he goes way beyond this. Now he's going to take this interpretation and put it into the Yerushalmi. I don't know how he's going to do that. The Af HaYerushalmi moda was there. What was the Yerushalmi's issue? HaYerushalmi sover the Geder Isur Chadash. Get this. That Isur Chadash is not like Nevela and Treifa and Shkotzim and Ramasim. It's not an Isur Chefta, but rather it's an Isur Gavra. Who could believe that the Isur Chadash is an Isur Gavra? Shekein Isur B'Psachim of Aleph. Shekol Mokum Shenemar Bo Lo Yochal Af Isur Hana B'Mashma. Umakcha Gemara Herei Chadash Shenemar Bo Lo Yeachel. I think we learned this together right here in this room, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, so the Gemara says then Chodesh should be Asur B'Hana. And the Gemara answers, Shiny Chodesh, Shehitira HaTorah B'Hana Midechsiv Be Ktsir Chem Shalachem. So why is it that Chodesh is mutar b'Hana after it says lo yachel? Because the Torah went out of its way to say kutzrechem, it's yours, and if it's yours, it means you own it and you're allowed to have benefit. Again, the Gemara later on is going to ask, so why did the Torah say lo yachel and then say lochem? It's a Yerushalmi asks the identical question: why is Chadash mutar b'Hana, but gives a different answer. And the Gemara answers in Yerushalmi, Shiny Chadash, Shekavo bo HaKosuv Zman. That same object, that same grain of wheat, which is today Chadash with an Isur Lav and a Chiv Malchus, tomorrow is mutar, becomes Yashan, the very moment that they bring the Omer. Like I was visiting Rabbi Siegel. He's the Rav in Newton, Massachusetts. He's a son-in-law to Rav Aaron Soloveitchik. So when I was there for Shabbos, it was before Pesach. Maybe it was in the middle of the winter. I don't remember exactly what month it was, but I opened the closet and I see boxes and boxes of cereals. He was really stashing Yasha. So something that is kavua bozman, that's all it says in the Yerushalmi, is mutar b'Hana. Bir divrei Yerushalmi says the Smith. You know what the Yerushalmi has in mind? She'ein chodesh kishar macholas asuros shehem isur chefta. Because if it were an isur chefta, it would be also the olam. Ella ha'adam manua, a person is prevented or he is enjoined mi lechol. El le'akev achiloso ad zman avoras ha'omer. B'imkein areu ki isur achila b'yom ha'kippurim she'ein mashma'oso shekol ha'macholim sheba'olam nasim chefta d'isura b'yom ha'kippurim. That doesn't make any sense. Elohu isur ha'karkafta d'gavra she'yimna with an ayin at the end, right? Yimna atzmo me'achila b'yom zeh, and that's an isur gavra. Nimtza, Yerushalmi sover shechodesh hu isur gavra, And therefore the Gemara asks, Sheidache Isur Zeh Mipnei Esei de Matzah. The Rambam, based on the Bavli, didn't even have this kasha because the Rambam understood that Chodesh, like all Machalos Asuros, is an Isur Chefta. And the reason why it's Mutar Ba'ano is because of the special pasuk Uba Kutrachem. And if it's an Isur Chefta, then there's no possibility of applying Esei Dochalos Esei. So the Rambam would never have even raised the question of Esei Dochalos. And therefore, in the Bavli, it's completely omitted because the Bavli understood that there's no way, no how, there's not even a Havamina that the mitzvah of Matzah would override the Los Asef Chadash under the law of Esei Dochalos because the Esei is on the Gavra and the Isur is on the Chefta, like all Machos Asuros. And Achila cannot override Achila. But the Yerushalmi L'Shitaso operated with a different logic as to why there's no Isur Hana in the case of Chodesh, and that's because it's Kavua Zman, which if we equate it with Yom Kippur, it's an Isur Gavra. If it's an Isur Gavra, we would have a serious problem. Why should the essay of Mata override the Lotus of Chodesh? Midin essay Dochalosis, and they're both equal, and they're both an Isur Gavra. Therefore, the Yerushalmi l'shitaso that Chodesh is an Isur Gavra, Shaper Hiksha she'idache Isur Zeh al yidei Matzah mishum esei de Matzah, and the Yerushalmi comes up with the shita of Rabbi Yossi to demote Matzah because it's Kodem Antiv. Aval l'shitas habavu. Kushanei Kara Lessa. The Gemara could never have raised the question of Esei Dochalotza She'er Chodesh Isur Cheftahu the Matzah Mitzvah Gavra Karkafta the Gavra Kenein and Doche Mipnei Ha Esei the Gavra. Wow. So again, to summarize, whereas the Shagasari on one polar extreme understood that the omission of the Bavli is because in the Bavli it was partial that Esei Dochalotza applies to Matzah and Chodesh. According to our Samech in the Rambam, the reason why it was omitted from the Bavli is because it's not even a Havamim. There's no mechanism here for Esei Dochalos because the Esei is on the Gavra and the Isur Lav is on the Chefta. There's no Hatama to apply Esei Dochalos. Our Yerushalmi faces this question. That's because the Yerushalmi L'Shitaso understood and classified the Isur Chodesh as an Isur Gavra. And where do we see the Yerushalmi that Chodesh is an Isur Gavra? Because Yerushalmi calls it an Isur Shekavua Lo Zman. It's a limited time-bound Isur. And any time-bound Isur Shenikva Lo Zman is an Isur Gavra, not an Isur Chefta. Hence, the Yerushalmi is bothered. Why not apply the principle of Esei Dochalos? Are we out in the clear? Not yet. Question. Eich shayach din esei dochalos haseh b'yibum. Now all this has to take us back to Yibum, and we have to come up with a modus vivendi, to understand why the Gemara applies esei dochalos haseh in the case of Yibum. And again, that's before we have the shlug up. The Gemara rejects this because it's a losa sashesh bokaris, but now we're not operating with it. Hello. Halavin shall isure bia halim beguf ha'isha v'naseis ha'isha lechefta de isura al hayavam. I'm not sure that's intuitive, but he's saying it's almost like the physical body of the woman, and since she's an erva, generates an isur. And I would add here as a footnote, that's probably why Arayos is not just an Isur Bia, it's an Isur Hana. You can't get any benefit whatsoever from an error. Now the mitzvah's Yibum, he says, he muteles al karkafta de gav. That is a classic case of a chovas gav. So the Bia and the Isur Erva is in the Chefza, and the mitzvah is in the Gav. And I would add again, I think the Arsamech is l'shitasa that in Machalas Asuris is always an Isa Chefza, because you can have X and Y. X is Asr, Y, which is identical to X, is Mutter. And the answer is that it's an Isa Chefza. The Torah prohibited this Chefza, but not that Chefza. In the case of Erva, she's Muteres to this person, and she's Asur to this person. It must be that it's an Isa in the Chefza. Yeshlomar, Gam Esei di Yavam, Eino Chal ala Gavra, Bilvad. This is wild. Now, I was hoping that he would change his position but to the Isser Erev and say it's on the Gavra, not on the Chefza. He's doing the exact opposite. He's claiming that Yibum is on the Chefza. What does that mean? A Chefza da Yevama, Behachefza shel Yevama chal chiv shetisyabem lo kidei lahakim shem li'achiv. Yalkeina mitzvah chala begufa behidoches ha'isur shechal begufa. That both the essay of Yibum and the Losas of Arayas are on the Chefza and not just the Gam. Now, I think what he means by Chefza is that there's a goal, there's an objective. L'hakim shem li'achim. And the way in which that goal is reached is through the Chefza of the Isha, right? That she now will produce a child, al shem achiv hameis. He considers that as an Isser, as a mitzvah, in the Chefza. I mean, you have to add one other sentence here because there's also a mitzvah gavra, that you can't deny that. But what he means to say is that once there's a mitzvah in the chefza the isha, and that would allow me to be matir the chefza of the erva in the isha, then for sure I can apply esei dochalosas. I need the essay dochalosas because otherwise there's an Isser Erev in the Chefza the Isha. I remove the Isser Chefza the Isha by virtue of the Mitzvah Sagavra in the Chefza the Isha. Because Yibum is in the Gavra, is the Gufa. One thing that's bothering me here, but I'm not sure. In the case of Esei Dochalosas, mitzvah in the Chefza. Now that doesn't bother me because I have a mitzvah Gavra as well of Achilas HaPesach. That's an interesting question. Is there really a mitzvah in the Gavra? Oh yeah, because you have to eat at least a kizayos. Yeah, that would indicate the mitzvah in the Gavra. Now, Rabbosai, I want to introduce, in the 5 minutes or so that we have left, a kasha of the Tosas Yom HaKippurim. I think his name was Ibn Chabib. If I'm not mistaken, I have to look that up, but he lived, I think, about 400 years ago. And he wrote extensively on Moed, but occasionally he addresses issues beyond Moed, like this case here. And here's the question that he asks. Mitzvahs Yibum, Eina Ela al Hayav. Who's obligated to the mitzvah of Yibum? Is it he, is it she, or is it both? If you read the pasuk says, Yevama Yavo Alem, which implies that he is commanded in this mitzvah. Aval Yevama Eina Mitzuva al Kach. Meaning, in the context of a brotherly relationship, one brother has to be careful for his other brother. In the context of a marriage relationship, after she becomes an almana and her husband dies, He doesn't have to have this commitment, to marry his brother because of lahakim shev. That's a chiyuv on Yevamot Yavola on him. So now the Tos Yom Kippur says, how are you going to apply essay dochalosis? It's his essay, but it's harlosas. In someone else's essay, midocha ma'alosis, meaning when she submits herself, if you can use that term, to the via of Yibum, she is violating an Iser of Erev. Narvas, you're going to say, but essay dochalosis, but she's not obligated in this. The essay is obligatory on him. Hayavama ena mitzuva. The ilu ha'isur bias harayis over him gama ish v'gama ish. That's derived from a pasuk v'nichritzu hanafashas ha'elu b'Yisrael. And came ech ola al das ha'gemara lahatir erva lemitzvas yibum bitam essay dochalosas. Hello, ba'isha ein shum essay shetidocha es haverashum. In other words, when she is about to engage in the bia with an erva, and the ba'ala erva, the yavam, is fulfilling his mitzvah, how can she engage and violate the isur lav arayos for the sake of his mitzvah? That's essay dochalosa said. The kevin shebeisha ain't shum essay she yitches haver shalah. How can you apply essay dochalosa? Says the Tosfos Yom Kippur, we have to derive a radical conclusion, a very far-reaching conclusion here. Shekol mitzvahs hasei shel adam echad shemutal olav hasosa biyachad im acher harei hi docha afes halav shel kavera. That if one person has a mitzvah saseh, but he can only fulfill that mitzvah saseh with a partnership with someone else, even if that someone else has the lav without the essay, we will still apply the principle of essay dochalosis. I wonder why. What's the logic or what's the proof for such a thing? When I say the proof, what I mean is, obviously, the Tosfos Yom Kippur thinks he has a proof right here in our Gemara of Essay Dochalosa and Yibum, but where did the Gemara know such a thing from? That because Reuven has an essay that he can only fulfill together in partnership with Shimon, Shimon can violate a law, even though he's not obligated to the essay. It's far from intuitive. So if the Gemara was working with that premise and therefore applied the principle of Essay Dochalosa, so where did the Gemara get it? That I don't understand. See, in a case of a Chovas Tzibur, I understand. We're all in it together. But in a case of a partnership where Reuven needs Shimon, but Shimon is not obligated, so it's very nice on Shimon's part to word again. I'm always looking for words here today. To allow, I'll use that. I'm looking for to allow Reuven to fulfill that mitzvah. But if Reuven has a mitzvah and it could be dochalosa, what good does that do for Shimon? Shimon wants to be very altruistic and give Reuven an opportunity to fulfill his mitzvah and participate. How is that enough to violate his law? For example, the Gemara says in Masechet Shabbos, "V'chi omrim lo li'adam chatei b'shvil shetizkeh chavercha." But let's say Reuben puts the dough in the oven, so Shimon allowed to take the dough out of the oven to prevent Reuben from violating the malacha of afiyah. We don't say such. So how do you apply essay dochalosa to Shimon if Shimon is not even obligated in the essay? He's enjoined from the losas. We're going to take a look tomorrow, B'linetter at Rabbi Kivega. Rabbi Kivega is going to try to put this whole sugya in perspective. And Steve, if you have a chance, maybe you could make some more photocopies. So we don't have, doesn't always have to be my Horash Balpeh. Okay, then I want to take this opportunity to say bon voyage to Jeff, right, Jeff? You're leaving tomorrow.
Well, actually, our flight was canceled, but Bezrat Hashem will go out on Motzi Shabbat.